Thank you, Uptown, for having me. I really appreciate that. This is a great opportunity. One thing that I really enjoy, obviously, Terry's mentioned, is teaching. I teach about 1,000 people a year, and it's a lot of fun. And this was a great opportunity because it was a topic that I haven't taught on, so I put together this presentation here today. This will be the first time playing it, so I don't know how well it times for the 50 minutes. I'm sure I can fill if I'm short. But it's an interesting topic for me because I think it's one of my areas of expertise. And when I started putting the presentation together, I thought, well, I wonder how many people know more about this than I do. And at the end of the day, it really comes down to experiences, right? How many deals have you been through? How many different ways to navigate a deal might there be? And so hopefully everyone today will get at least one nugget and one takeaway from it. The first thing, if you're a realtor, I just need you to raise your right hand and swear never to use any of these strategies against me if we're in the middle of a real estate transaction. That way I can continue, right? Otherwise, you know, I'm kind of selling my clients short, which I certainly don't want to do. So let's get right into it here. I'm going to do a little share screen. There we go. Okay, so can you see my screen? Yep, okay, cool. So obviously negotiation is navigating every deal for a win. And the reason navigating comes up and is so important in my mind is that to be a hard negotiator or a really great negotiator, it's really you navigating a lot of different elements. And we as investors are consistently in that position where to do something new and something that makes sense, you have to try to make something out of nothing. You have to communicate with someone who feels differently from you. You have to put yourself in the position of the other party's shoes, and you get an opportunity, most likely, to play both sides. Maybe not of that specific transaction, but certainly of transactions. You know, if you buy a property at some point, you're going to sell that property, right? So that's something certainly to be thinking about. So, I mean, I put the picture in there because I want everyone to understand if that guy can invest in real estate and have somebody trust them, you can too. It's interesting, when I jumped on here, there were several comments about the mustache. I'm sorry, I grew my beard out kind of by accident. So that's my COVID costume. But let's go over just some of the things for you. Those of you who don't know me or aren't familiar with me, these are just some high points. I've been a licensed realtor for almost 20 years. I'm currently, we close about 16 to 20 million in volume a year. I have 2 people on my team, and a majority of that is investor real estate. We do a lot of you know, direct transactions as well, but I really enjoy the sales side. I own a property management company, which I sold and combined with Garcia Group Real Estate Services, and then I do the real estate side. But what I found in doing both property management and real estate is that I didn't really have time to be the best at both and also be investing as consistently as I wanted. And so what I really enjoyed doing was helping my clients plan or strategize their investment career, which is kind of what we're doing tonight, right? As I mentioned, I do a little bit of public speaking. I also have a podcast called Invest in the West. There's my shameless plug. Feel free to pull that up and listen to it. And on my investment side, I currently have properties which include 3 mobile home parks, 1 commercial building, a 4-plex in 3 separate states. And I have 8 partner owners within all those properties, and those are in 4 separate entities. So as you can see, I have a little bit of a diversified portfolio with a little bit of a specialty in the mobile home parks, which is definitely my sweetheart. But that's kind of what I enjoy doing, and diversifying and kind of putting these together. And we're going to go over a couple of those deals at the tail end of this, just to kind of give you an idea of how I put some of those together. All right, so it's always said, know your enemy, but I think know your enemy is not your enemy, right? Because a lot of times transactions can become somewhat adversarial, and you know, it's kind of like the landlord-tenant relationship. A landlord versus a tenant is different than a landlord with a tenant. And what I like to explain to people, clients oftentimes, is you have to put yourself in their shoes, don't have an emotional reaction, and try to navigate the process from your perspective with an end goal, right? So you want to understand your skill set and where you come in, right? For me, the reason that I have 8 different partners within my real estate investments is because I am not 100% great at every single thing. There are some things I need, and sometimes that need is money. So I bring people who have money into the deal and I make them money. And that works well because they might be wrapped up in their own life, doing their own thing, and all they want is the return. And if that's the case, they're a perfect partner because I want total control to make us all money. That's where you jump in and start building your team. Then you want to collaborate with your team and their expertise and their knowledge, and then you're obviously going to be collaborating with a seller if you're a buyer and a buyer if you're a seller. And then you keep repeating it, right? Because we're all about growth. When it comes to finding the next deal, you want to focus on repeating some of the positive things that you've done and then repeating the process and developing it, having learned from the mistakes that you've made. Okay, investing in Hebrew. It's the art of backward planning. Hebrew is, you read Hebrew backwards. So many of my clients say, okay, well, how do I get started? And I always tell people, you have to start at the end, right? You have to identify your goal. Goals are set to be reached, right? What is it exactly that you want out of that? Is it cash flow on a monthly basis so you don't have to work anymore? Is it the return? You're essentially looking to replace your 10% return with a 20% return. Is it equity in properties where you can, at some point down the road, far in the future, sell everything and have $2 million in the bank? Which play are you looking for, right? Then you want to establish that process. You want to say, okay, well, how do I get to that goal? How do I reach it? And that process allows you to plan and to put together an actual business plan, which some people don't call it that, but it certainly is, right? Because if investing is your business, you're planning your end goal. And then the other thing that plan does is expose weaknesses. What am I missing? Who should be in there? Where am I going to get the money? What kind of loan product is this? How many seminars do I have to go to? Who should I be connecting with? Who has the products that I want? Who's closed real estate transactions like the ones I want to close? So there's a lot to that, I think. Then you're going to put together your budget and structure. And that shows what your realistic options are, right? Because my portfolio of properties that I have is not the first portfolio I bought. I didn't go out one day and say, look, I'm going to buy a few trailer parks, a commercial property, and a fourplex. Instead, I started with a house. I moved that to a duplex. I moved that to a commercial property, moved that, and then started adding and retaining. And so there's a plan with that. You have to know kind of where you're going to start and find that starting point. And that starting point has to be a project that, in the end, will increase your likelihood of a successful finish, right? Because if you get into a product that you have no idea what you're doing, how you did it, or how you should do it, or who you need on the team, even if you have the money to do that, but you don't have the right team, you've got a problem from the start. So the reason we're going over some of this background things is that, every time you see any sports team come out on the court or on the field or the pitch, you're watching a team that has been practicing these plays, has been planning it, and has been putting together. They've been mentally prepared, they're physically fit, and that's kind of what we're going to start with. So it's important to remember to prepare. Okay, so as far as your end goal, let's walk through that just a little bit here. Are you trying to build an empire, or are you just adding another arm to your retirement plan, right? How active do you want to be in this? That's one of the things that you really need to be thinking about. Are you using each property for a specific target? So this is a really interesting concept that I learned probably 15 years ago. I was very early in my real estate sales career. But what I did was, when my kids were born, I bought a house for each of them. And they didn't live in the house, although the way that they cried and made a mess, I wish that I could have put them in a separate house. I ended up buying that home because if you think about it from an investment perspective, those kids are going to spend 12 years in school, another 4 years, plus they're not even going in until they're 5. So they're, 23 years into a 30-year mortgage if you buy a property the day that they're born. Then the day that they graduate from college, you're 23 years into an asset that you've been writing off, depreciating. The property itself is appreciating, and now it's got pretty significant cash flow. So For me, I'm thinking, okay, I earmark each of those properties for a specific purpose. And now I have multiple properties in a specific entity for a specific purpose, right? Because that fund needs to grow. My retirement fund needs to grow more than my kid's college fund. Because the college fund at the end, one of my kids, my 13-year-old, the property that I bought for her has about $262,000 in equity on that property, and she's 13. So unless college skyrockets even more than one could assume, I think she's going to be all right, and I'll be able to pay for that. The key is to not tell her anything about it. Otherwise, she just won't really care too much about going to college or trying to be, a respectable human. So you want to be thinking, is it a vacation home? Is it legacy building that you're trying to do? Do you want the cash flow? Are you going for the write-offs? How long do you have to reach the finish line, right? If you're 55 years old, you have a lot less time than a lot of people just starting in real estate investing. How much do you have to spend? Are you going to be putting cash into this, or do you have to be the person out beating the streets and bringing the deals to the table for the people that have the money? How much do you want to leverage? This is a really tricky question, because when I started investing in real estate, actually when I was in real estate and we had the crash in 2007, 8, 9, 10, a lot of the clients that I had that were over leveraged lost everything because they just hadn't really thought ahead and tried to figure out, okay, how much of a buffer do I need? How much do I need in reserves? So that's something that you may learn, or you can learn from someone else. Are you focused on the cash flow, the appreciation, depreciation, or all of it, right? If there's one sticking point that is more important to you, you can focus on that. I highly recommend you at least consider looking at a well-rounded investment and then analyzing those assets in that way. Consider the tax impact on the purchase and the sale. Okay, that's obviously for investors who are familiar with the tax strategies and whatnot, a 1031 exchange is an invaluable tool. So understand your limitation and contributions. I think this is really critical because oftentimes investors specifically, can be a little bit stingy in who they let in on the deal because they want to keep more of the deal. When in reality, you can lose more than you win in keeping it, right? So if you focus on your skill set, if you're a financial analyst and you're specific to like a financial position, that might be something that you're contributing your time to, which can save people thousands of dollars, right? Some people are very creative. They have an eye for a great deal. They're a visionary. They see something in an up-and-coming neighborhood. I mean, the number of people who said, oh yeah, if I would have bought in Selwood back in the day, it would have been great, right? Or Multnomah Village, or right now it's Coley and Woodstock and Rose City, right? So you see these neighborhoods that back in the day were nothing. And everyone comes to you and says, oh, I had an opportunity for $10,000. I had a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, blah, blah, blah. So if you are one of those people, that's still a contribution. It's not maybe the same contribution as the guy fronting the down payment, but it's an opportunity for you to contribute. And certainly there's value in that. Do you have relationships? I have a couple clients who are really well tied into people who have a lot of money. And they have an opportunity there because they know a ton of people that are physicians or are Intel folks. And those folks don't have the time, energy, or expertise necessarily. I mean, they're choosing not to. I'm not saying that they categorically don't have that ability. I'm just saying in general, those folks may not want to be putting their time into that. And so they would be happy to partner with some of those folks. Are you drawn to a particular area or property type, right? Mobile home parks is not everyone's cup of tea. And a majority of it is stigma, right? The stigma of a mobile home park is that you're a slumlord, it's the bottom barrel. For me, it's cash flow. It is bottom barrel, which to me is stabilization. At some point, if the market tanks and those folks lose their home and they can't pay $600 a month in space rent, the guy who was paying $1,200 a month in rent can pay $600 a month in space rent, right? So for me, that's okay. And I can go in and clean up the park and make it a great, clean, healthy, safe environment. So there are different skill sets there. Do you know the market? Do you know the process? Are you familiar with the risks that are involved in that? I think that's really critical for you to know. Maybe your market knowledge and expertise is something you can present to others. Do you have the threshold of pain needed to invest in real estate? And does your partner? I think that is critical because the number of divorces that are a derivative of a real estate deal gone bad are probably significant, right? So it's important to know, is this an asset class that you have the ability and the stomach to really seek and be a valid investor, right? Are you a fixer type person, or do you need to find a turnkey property? I'm not a turnkey guy. I am a stabilization guy. I like to find properties that are undermanaged or undermaintained and then stabilize those properties. I'm also not a fixer guy. I don't own lawnmower anymore, which it's a little bit embarrassing, but I hire people to do those things because my time is valuable. And in that situation, if I'm not a fix-it guy and I need a contractor to do it, there are two options. I can either hire contractors to do it and pay contractor wages, or I can bring a contractor in as a partner who has money and the expertise to come in and knock it out, someone who's vested in the project. And we're going to talk a little bit about developing your team here in a minute, but understanding who you are and being honest about that, I think, is a critical piece of it in building your team and as you get into negotiating some of these deals. Because if you buy a fixer and you're going back and forth on whether or not they're going to decommission an oil tank, repair the sewer line, and replace the roof, you need to know if you have that area of expertise and be honest with yourself about that. And if you don't, what's the actual cost there? So I know that we're not into the actual, going back and forth and negotiating. This is like more self-searching, but I think it's really a critical aspect of being a good negotiator. All right, on your team. If you're a realtor in the audience, you can see yourself here, right? You are a part of someone else's team. And that's where I found myself for years. It wasn't really until about 4 or 5, let's call it 6 or 7 years ago, that I got serious about investing. Because prior to that, I was busy in the business, and my investment in life and in my legacy or, building up wealth was building a business. So then I got to the point where I looked at the money I was making other people. We were managing 275 properties, and I was looking at the tenant ledgers and the P&L, and I could see all the money that my clients were making, and I said, wait a minute, I'm the one making all the money for them. I'm managing the asset, I'm finding the deal, I'm putting the deal together, I'm negotiating the deal. And so then that was a pivotal point for me. And not to criticize all you realtors, I commend you for being here on this class, because over the years, I have come to understand that realtors are literally the worst real estate investors categorically than any other profession. And it makes sense if you think about it. When the market is hot and everything's selling and they're selling high, what are realtors doing? They're making a ton of money. So what do? They buy a house. And then the market tanks, nothing is selling. Everything that is selling low. They need to feed their lifestyle because they're not closing any deals. What do? They sell their asset that they bought high. So they bought high and they sold low. That's obviously not what we counsel our clients to do, right? So we build a team to really help us understand how to diversify, how to take the tax benefits, how to manage the asset, how to do the attorney, if you're going to be putting entities together, if you're going to be having partnerships together, you have to be very careful at what point does it become a syndication and you're putting out a public offering. Insurance agents, that's your highest and best first layer of defense is going to be insurance, right? And then obviously you've got contractors, inspectors, handymen, all of those people. But the important aspect there for me in my business, people ask what I do, and it's a little bit interesting because my kids for a long time thought that I was a property manager. And they're like, oh yeah, he's a property manager. And I always got offended by that. I didn't ground them or anything, but I wasn't happy that was the pigeonhole that they put me in. So over time, I've been trying to develop some type of 30-second elevator speech of what I do. And it's a little bit challenging because at the end of the day, I'm a little bit of a lot, right? I put deals together, I put people together, I'm a contact guy. A lot of my friends say, if ever I need anyone in any trade, I call Matt because he's got a guy, right? Oh, I got a guy for that. I got a painter, I got an asbestos guy, I got an indoor air quality guy and gal. I've got all of those people, and that's really important because that building of the team has been such a focus of mine over the last 20 years that I didn't even really take it seriously directly and for myself until about 6 or 7 years ago. And that's when it really all kind of came to fruition for me. So then we get in a deal, right? So that's all the background information. One of my favorites, my favorite quotes is bite off more than you can chew and chew it. And that's exactly how I am. For me, I learn inside a deal. If I have to watch a video about it or if I have to read about it, I'm just not that guy. I need to be doing it to understand it, and I need the problem to get to the solution. If the problem is there, I can find the solution, figure it out, fix it, and keep it together. And so for me, some may say it's cart before the horse, but that's not how I work it. Now, part of the negotiation here, first, as I mentioned, is having a team so that your CPA can say, hey, dude, these numbers don't work. You should not be doing this deal. Or your lender can say, no, there's no way that this deal will finance, right? So that they are going to keep you out of trouble if you've got the right people behind you. And I think that that is something that all of us really want an opportunity to do. So then you get in a deal. It's all just time and money, right? You have to understand the rules, know how to play the game. You want to know who's involved, what the time is, what the cost is, right? So for time, you want to be thinking, okay, how am I going to finance it? What's my down payment amount? How am I coming up with it? What are the carrying costs? And then what's the rehab cost, right? Because when you're looking at a project and you're thinking about stabilization, that's what I call it, right? At the end of the day, I want stabilization. And stabilization to me is when the asset is performing and it's done, whether that be a rehab or a flip, or if it's a long-term hold. If it's a turnkey property, your carrying costs are going to be fairly low and your rehab costs are going to be fairly low, but you still have to figure out the financing and down payment piece. Whereas if it's a rehab and stabilization, you've got all those things to figure out. Then you want to research the opponent. And this is a little bit easier when you're not dealing with an agent. I'm not advocating that you don't deal with an agent on the other side. I'm just saying if you're out door knocking, you can do a little bit more research and you have time. If you're waiting for someone to hit the market and you're dealing with an agent, listing agent on the other side, there's a filter there that they're not going to be telling you the things that a lot of times a seller will tell you. They'll be very open. Oh, I just got to get rid of this thing, right? Those are golden words. But what's your motivation, right? So what's their goal in the end? Are they trying to do a 1031 exchange? Do they have a timeline specifically? How did they acquire it and when did they acquire it, right? I mean, that's something, if they've had it for 20 years, they may not care if you get it for 700 or 550 because they bought it for 150, right? But if they bought it 5 years ago for 700,000, you're not getting below 700 or they're taking a loss on it, right? So it kind of helps you strategize there. Is there a tax strategy for them? I came across a mobile home park a couple days ago, and the guy, he owns 75% of it. His mom still owns 25% of it. He's been buying her out over time. And she's ready to move out of the park and into a home. She lives there currently as one of the units. She wants out. She wants $200,000 to buy a house cash in the area where they are. And he said, I don't need out of the deal. To be honest, I would rather wait and pull out a third of the remaining balance over the following 3 years. So ideally, he wants to do owner financing so that he can have the tax benefit of spreading that out over multiple years. That's a really important piece of information because you can come in a little bit less than someone going full price, but the tax dollars add up so that he has a benefit if you can spread that out over years. Then you got to figure out, okay, now how do I arrange that financially? Because if I'm giving him $200,000 in the first year, and then I owe him $200,000 for 3 years in a row, I can't just do a cash out refi or finance a quarter of the property for 4 years in a row, right? I'm gonna have to come up with $200,000. So how do I do that? So, I mean, obviously that it may come with some type of challenge, but that's not to say you couldn't win the deal in utilizing his end goal or his end tax strategy. Second, or lastly, is that their only asset? Because I talked to another guy 2 weeks ago. He has a park that I'm looking at, and he's trying to sell this one, but he said, oh, this is my my lowest maintenance property. And I said, really? Well, how many properties do you have? Oh, I have 62. That's a pretty significant opportunity, right? Excuse me. That's an opportunity for you to say, oh, 62, which are the ones that are your highest maintenance? How much would you like to get rid of those properties, right? Then you're not looking at market price, you're looking at below market price because they're a pain in that guy's butt. So then you're in a position then when you can flip the script a little bit and say, you know what, I'll pay your top dollar on this one if you give me property number 6 and 18 for below market. At the end of the day, you lose 2 headaches. You get full price on the high property that you think is easy and turnkey, and we're both happy because I just acquired 3 properties instead of 1. So that's a really good opportunity for you to just have a conversation, relate to the person, because at the end of the day, you're a human and they're a human, right? So, you know, you got to know the numbers, and this is something that not a lot of us are super interested in. I mean, we want the end number, right? We want to know at the end of the day, what am I going to make? What's my cash flow? But to really dig in on this, a lot of us, especially realtors, are deal slingers and salesmen. We're not really number crunchers. And to have someone on your team that does that, or to fine tune this tool, is really, really critical. Because you can come into a sweetheart deal, looks great, it's awesome, I love the neighborhood, I love this, I love that. All of those are emotional responses. You need a financial response to every single deal. And you need a pattern, and you need a way to analyze that asset. So you can see on this slide, some of the things that I'm using to kind of analyze what those look like, right? And then this spreadsheet, I plug all these things in, and then I can push those over to the other tabs. And then by the time I get to the other tabs, it tells me what I want, right? And so at the end, this is kind of what, these are trigger points for me personally, right? I want the annual return on the initial capital, and I want to know also the return on total equity. The return on total equity for me is going to tell me how much equity I have tied up in that property and if it's working for me. But the return on initial capital is really critical because if you look at these numbers, those are crazy numbers to an investor. This is on that park that the guy told me that this is the lowest maintenance property. So, I mean, you can only imagine what he's looking at versus what I'm looking at, right? If he's analyzing and saying, oh, it's low maintenance, you know, I'd take 600. So he was asking 600,000 for it, which I think the value is probably higher, but I went conservative on that. And then I offered 525. Now I might end up at 600 because I think the value is probably a little bit closer to, I don't know, 675. But I'm going conservative on the value because I want to leave I want to put myself in a backup position that if I had to liquidate it, I could do it. Or if I end up wanting to flip it for a park that makes me more money, I could do that as well. So anyway, you may not nerd out on this stuff, but once you try it a little bit, it becomes a little bit more sexy. When my wife walks in and I'm looking at spreadsheets, she rolls her eyes and walks out, and which is totally fine. But to me, this is what I enjoy doing now. I mean, I don't mind looking at the photos of the park and going through the inspections, but when I'm looking at this thinking, holy cow, by year 5, because I usually look at year 5 and year 10, if I'm pulling in 36% return on cash, I'm feeling pretty good about that. So know your deal breakers, right? At what point, and you know, from an investment perspective, it's always different when you're buying your own home. I know that my wife has preferences on the house that we buy, and we've got to be on the same page. And she has some things that are deal breakers, right? Whether that be a master bathroom or a view, that doesn't really matter. Is there a deal breaker? And if so, what is it? For me, it may be different from you. And you see this a lot with flippers. Flippers will say, okay, my deal breaker is I got to make a 10% return. And that's when I started seeing the people that were losing all their houses. Because a 10% return is so slim on a flip, it's not worth it. You got to be like in the 30-40% range, I think. So you have to kind of look at what your risk is. Is it a 20% return, right? Is it you know, a flip or a 1031 timeline? Are you trying to get it in season-wise? So does a faster close make a difference? Does possession make a difference? Does construction time make a difference? Are you wanting a non-recourse loan because you want to minimize that liability? Or, you know, maybe there are tax benefits. So I've got a couple of transactions where some of my partners are self-directed IRAs. So they're not mine. I brought in partners who had money and they wanted to make money on their money. So one of my self-directed IRA partners well, any of them, they don't need the tax benefit. So you can set up your entity so that if there's a self-directed IRA in the deal, they don't need the tax benefit. So maybe they get a little bit more cash flow. Maybe you get all the tax benefit, right? But the return is really what they're looking for because they want to beat what they're getting in their IRA. So if you remember what your focus is and what your deal breaker, what the deal breaker might be, you can stay on track and you'll know that when you're negotiating within the transaction, that if the seller says, no, I'm not going to do that, you know to walk. So you want to consider the cost of not doing the deal at the same time. You know, if you don't buy this, what are the alternatives, especially in situations where you're in a 1031 exchange, right? Yeah, it might be a deal breaker because you're only making 18%, not 20% on this deal, but you're out of time. You have to close on a deal or you're going to take a 30% hit on capital gains, right? That's a fairly significant difference. So you have to go back to your spreadsheet, change the numbers and say, okay, well, you know, what return am I not getting, okay? You want to identify the difference between the preference and the must-have. Always focus on the net, the purchase price minus the expenses, and then that's going to give you what you actually end up with net, right? So be honest about what your style of negotiation is because you can't come into a deal and do a little bait and switch, right? No one likes that. The realtors out there for sure know that the bait and switch is the best way to turn the seller off, right? You come in and make a deal, make an offer at full price and you ask for $50,000 off the price. That's not going to work because I mean, obviously, unless you can justify that, right? So within the negotiation, what I tell clients typically is, you know, let's not go in thinking we're getting a different price. Let's go in with a reasonable purchase price, be straight and direct about when we can close, how we can get it done, and then put ourselves in a position where if something major comes up, we can negotiate on those items. But if we treat a seller with respect and give some dignity there, you want to be on the positive side of that. So inspections and escape clauses. Escape clauses really are just that. The typical real estate transaction has quite a few escape clauses. And it can be, your contracts can be loaded up with those. And the financing escape clause is probably the strongest hammer that you've got because it's fairly ambiguous in my opinion on what you have to provide to show that that you no longer qualify. At any rate, number one, you want to give yourself time. Don't over promise and under deliver because you put yourself in a position with a straight shooter seller who says, no, you said you were going to close on the 13th. We're closing on the 13th. I'm not extending. You said it was going to be done. You said you could do it. And that's why I went with your offer. I'm keeping the earnest money if you can't close. You want to look at balancing the repairs and the purchase price, right? Again, that goes back to knowing your net. You want to just focus on your total project cost and what the return is after that. I would not recommend threatening without intent. A lot of people say, oh, you know, this is a deal breaker. If you don't do the roof, we're out. Okay, well, I'm not doing the roof. Go ahead and send over the termination. So then you come back and say, okay, well, we'll move forward. At that point, they say, no, I didn't really like the tone. If you were kidding about that, you may very well have been kidding about the sewer scope as well. And we're not doing this. We're not doing the sewer or the roof. And you can talk yourself out of the deal pretty quickly. So I'd be very careful about that. I always recommend having a backup plan, right? Especially if you're a flipper. Analyze the property both as a flip and a long-term rental, which obviously you have to look at some type of cash out refi or refinance at a rate where you can still rent that property out. You put it on, you go in, you buy a flip, you're delayed a month, you're over budget 20 grand, and then the election 2020 happens, and regardless of who wins, everyone hates everyone, which is obviously a recipe for disaster. Then you add COVID, and you know, the whole thing just ignites. You have to put yourself in a position where you're not over leveraged and you can turn that flip into a rental. So there's always an escape plan along with your escape clauses. Let's see. Running to the problems as soon as you can and as soon as you know that there's an issue, I think is one of the major faults of both real estate agents and investors. Once you know that there's a potential problem either with your financing or with the timing of your financing and closing, or if you have an issue with the inspections, many people decide that they are in a position where they're going to hold off and try to fix it. at some point, or it'll all work out. I say get in there, get gritty, and fix it. Place a value on your own time. That's something that a lot of people don't understand. You know, if you're working in Intel and you're spending 20 hours a week doing real estate stuff or managing your own assets, should you be maybe not managing your own properties and have a property manager do it with their level of expertise, and you go out and find another deal, or work harder so you can pay for another deal, right? You really have to be prepared to say no and pull out of any transaction. And a lot of people are just really hesitant because the fear of missing out is certainly prevalent. And you need to just be ready to say, hey, look, I lost a deal. And maybe I bid too low. Maybe on that park at 600 and I offered 525. Maybe I lose it. And I've lost a couple. I lost mobile home park. They were asking 1.8 million. I offered 1.7. Another offer came in. I kept my offer at 1.7 because in my mind, it wasn't worth 1.7 because I wanted X return. Well, at that point, I probably could have made it work with another 100,000 on a project that size. So I should have reanalyzed, put the numbers in and said, okay, is that really my deal killer? So I learned from that, but you can't be afraid to walk away. I'm going to go over a couple examples of some deals that I've done just to kind of give some context to it. And then we're going to open it up for some questions and whatnot. To be honest, I don't know what time I started, so I'm not sure that I've gone long enough, but I'll make sure that we do. So let's go through a couple of these, and if you have some questions or you wanted something a little more nitty, let me know. Okay, so this is my commercial building. It's a commercial building that I bought in Northeast Portland back in 2016. So I purchased it for $300,000. I gave him $5,000 down with $1,800 a month, triple net, and it was a lease option. So I was the tenant. I bought it with an option to purchase at $300,000. I gave him $5,000 down to be contributed towards the purchase price, and I paid him $1,800 a month, plus the triple nets. I put about $150,000 into the build out. I spent about $47,000 on rent and expenses within the next 2 years. So I paid him his $1,800 a month in rent and whatnot, and then I had my $150,000, and then I had I received $39,000 in revenue in 24 months because I fixed one side, rented that out, and then continued completing the second side. It appraised at $600,000 in 2017. I did a cash out refi of $425,000, which returned the $125,000 invested back to the investors. And then I have a mortgage on it, right? So the market value of it currently is $700,000 in 2020. On that deal, I've got 5 partners. There are 3 individuals and 2 self-directed IRAs. So my total invested is $197,000. I had income of $39,000. I had purchase price of $300,000. So I had a total project cost of $458,000. The value of the property is $700,000. So I've got $242,000 in equity. So that's my commercial stabilization project that I put together. So then I have this Vancouver fourplex example. So I purchased that one in, let's see, what was that, 2000, I think that was 17, late 2017. I bought it for $375,000. I put about $15,000 into a remodel. My out-of-pocket expense was $82,000 down with a loan of $300,000, which I did hard money on this one, short term. I did a cash out refi at $400,000, and I bring in $4,100 a month in rent. My expense for vacancy, maintenance, mortgage, taxes, and management is $2,938 per month. And on my cash out refi in early 19, it appraised at $690,000. On that one, there's just 2 partners, myself and one other partner. And then we invested $97,000. We bought it for $375,000. Our monthly income is about $4,100. So our monthly cash flow is $1,162, and the value is $690. So on that one, I've got about $290,000 in equity by the time we're done. So those are a couple of deals that I've worked on. Obviously, one is the commercial project in Portland, and then the other one's up in Vancouver, multifamily. I was gonna put one in here for mobile home parks, but those are so different. I figure most people don't really deal with the mobile home parks, so it might be a little bit wonky because the land lease versus the number of units you own. It gets a little bit complicated. So let's talk about takeaways, because every deal you're in, you should have a takeaway, right? Every class you go to, you should have a takeaway. So you try to figure out what the best way to go with each of them. First off, you can't negotiate if you're not in first position. That's really important, because people say, oh, they go into a deal and they say, well, I don't want to overpay for the property. So I want to go, and I know that there are multiple offers on the property, but I want to come in at full price, or I want to come in at, 5,000 less or 20,000 less, whatever that is. Unless you get the seller to say yes to your offer, you're not even in a position to negotiate. So negotiation doesn't really start with the offer. It starts with the setup of the deal and getting them to say yes. And once they say yes, at that point, you get into negotiations, whether that be on terms, conditions, or the actual repairs and whatnot that are done within it. We talked a little bit about bait and switch. It's not popular. I'm telling you, man, I've learned a lot over the years. You don't want to go in on one price to get the acceptance and then try to swap it up for the number that you want, unless you can put yourself in a position where you can point to the actual things that are going to cost, or the things you didn't know prior to purchasing. Focus on building your team first, focus on the process second, and then the deal last. Don't put the cart before the horse there. In my opinion, you've got to have your team, you have to have a process, then you look at the deal. Now, obviously, I told you earlier in the presentation that I learn as I go. That's not to say I don't prepare prior to. You're always going to learn something new in a product you've never done or a process you've never been through. But you can at least begin that process and development prior to. It's all about the numbers. Don't be emotionally driven by it. Make sure you take something away from every transaction. One of the things I really want to instill here is to reward your team and trust your instincts, right? Because rewarding your team will keep those people working for you. And one of the things that comes to mind with that is having someone, when I was first started out, I was 23 years old. I got my real estate license and I just farmed FSBOs. And I would talk to them on the phone, and then by the time that I met with them, they would look at me. I would show up at the door, and here was this 23-year-old that looked 12 years old. And they would just say, you're the guy I've been talking to? I would say, yes, I've got the contract right here. Let's get this signed. This is the day prior to DocuSign. And they were still just really shocked because I showed up looking so young, and it just wasn't what they were expecting. I was hungry. I was young and hungry. Now, I couldn't tout experience at that time, but I'll tell you, my pitch to them was, I'm the hungriest realtor in town. I'm the best at negotiating. I'm consistent. I'm not aggressive, but I'm assertive. I can put deals together. That was my pitch. Now my pitch is, hey man, I've got a lot of experience. I've done this a lot of times, and I'd love to help you get where you need to go. Now, am I hungry? Yes, in some ways, mostly for my own deals, but I'm also hungry to provide a great experience. I enjoy doing that, and I'm very upfront about that. That's why I have a team. They can do some of the follow-up and follow through that may not fit within my time budget and may not fit within my area of expertise. So that's really critical, and something that I have always trusted. I know who I enjoy working with, and when it comes to trusting your instincts, and you get through a deal and you had to work with a slimy guy to get to the end of that deal, and you just don't feel good about it, don't do a deal with that guy again. Or just remember how you need to approach that next deal with that specific agent, right? So yeah, I think that's about it. I'm happy to open up for any questions that you guys may have. There's a slide that I've got. Obviously, another shameless plug for my podcast if you'd like to take a look at that. And then I'll go ahead and stop the share. And if anyone has questions or anything, I'm happy to answer.
Okay, I know that we had a couple questions, so I'm trying to retrieve those again.
Okay.
And it says no open questions, but I thought there were.
Well, here,
I've got a few questions, Terry, that I've got pulled up from some of our attendees.
Okay, perfect.
Cool, go ahead.
All right, so quick question. Are the investment properties for your children in their names? And wouldn't it disqualify them for financial aid? I always thought that assets should be in the parents' names until they're done with college, so they appear poor on paper and get more grants or aids. Thoughts?
Yeah, the properties are not in the kids' names because if they end up not being positive humans and they're on meth someplace, I certainly don't want that asset transferred. So that is absolutely not the case. The tax strategy and tax planning really isn't done for the child until later on, because one of the things that I want to do is give options to my kid, and I want the tax deduction. At the end of the day, what I'm saying is worst case scenario, even with the capital gains hit, I'm still going to end up ahead than if I had some type of college savings plan, right? If I'm just putting money in and trying to acquire cash without having my assets grow, that's obviously going to be a completely different scenario, and I'm not going to make nearly as much money. So I can take the tax benefit and then just keep plugging that away and growing that like a mini portfolio. Then from a tax planning and a legal perspective on transferring that asset, once they graduate from college, or if they don't go to college but they're a great human, I'm fine with that. At that point, you can give them options. Do you want to move into the property? Do you want to sell that asset and buy your dream home because you and your husband are, have been smitten since beginning of high school? Do you want to keep it as a rental and then we transfer that over a period of years? So that's definitely a tax planning question for your specific situation at that time. But when you purchase the asset, to put that asset in a child's name would come with a lot of complications.
Okay, perfect. I know I saw another one in here too. Sorry.
I see that one. Okay.
All right. So I'm not seeing it. So if you have any other questions, I'm seeing super helpful. So that's wonderful. And
Good.
I have credit hours down as long as people have been here the whole 50 minutes for the class. That's good. But I know we do have some more time too, Matt. If you want to share anything that's up and new, I know you're on boards and on, you more than anybody I know, what's really happening out there. Is there anything we need to know that might be helpful? Just I know they've changed some of the laws lately.
Yeah.
So just a little overview.
Yeah, one specific thing, obviously, one of the challenges that a lot of investors have really considered and maybe been affected by is the moratorium on evictions, right? So we're in a world right now where we can't get a tenant out if they're not paying, and they've extended that. One of the things from a real estate perspective for you to keep in mind is that so under Oregon law, you're not allowed to terminate a tenant for no cause unless you fit under a certain number of exemptions. And a couple of those exemptions are if you or a family member want to move into the property, or if you're significantly remodeling a unit to the point where it's not habitable, like a kitchen, and they're going to be without a kitchen. You can terminate the tenant, pay the fee, and get the tenant out, and then you can go and sell it. So currently, under the new guidelines statewide, you're not allowed to utilize those exemptions. They did keep the exemption that if you have a bona fide purchaser who's interested in purchasing the property and you're in contract with that person, you can still give the notice to the tenant. So that's one nuance. I will give you a couple things. One of the things to keep in mind is that, one of the things I did when this thing first hit, I told all my investors, look, if you have an investment property and you want to get ahead of the game with a forbearance agreement in case your tenants don't pay, you can call and try to get on board with that. Well, I had a client who was selling their house, buying a new house, and then on the purchase side, they had in the beginning, in case something happened, they had done a forbearance agreement. But within the forbearance term, they paid it back. The problem is that on their credit and their status with that lender still shows that they're in a forbearance agreement, and even though they're current. So now there might be a hiccup with them qualifying for their purchase. So I would just be very careful, because even though a forbearance agreement technically is not going to modify your credit score and you're not going to have those 30-day lates, it still may modify the way that the lender is looking at the deal. So you have to be careful because they have quality control and underwriters. I also spoke with a lender that specializes in commercial deals and mobile home parks, and he said that the Fannie Mae deals are being very, very specific with additional guidelines. So I would just be very cautious right now if you're going into a deal that you have an addendum, because sometimes the commercial or the contract purchases, they may not come with a COVID-19 addendum, but you want to make sure that you are in a position where you are protecting your earnest money, utilizing some of those things. So it's interesting, just kind of going through that process and whatnot. So I hope that, I hope that's helpful. A question just came in, says, when you mentioned a hard money loan for one of your investments, what strategy should I consider when purchasing a multifamily with such a loan? Any other tips when going after hard money would be helpful. So I'll be honest, if you can avoid hard money, don't do it, right? I mean, the hard money costs a lot and it comes out of your bottom line. If you need it on a temporary basis, that's the one and only time that I've used it. And I'm not saying I'll never use it again, but I really enjoy putting people together. And I think that what you should maybe consider is begin building relationships with people who have money, not working for them, and bringing them in as partners. Because then that's it, they can be silent partners. The flip side of that, right, is that now they own a portion of the deal and they're going to get a portion of the profit. So you might not make all the profit. So I would analyze what does the deal cost me and what's my return if I'm using the hard money for a temporary time, then I do a flip and then do a cash out refi and then get rid of the hard money guy. What does it cost me to do that versus like what's the return on my cash versus what's the return on my cash if I bring a partner in who has the money, they provide the down payment or the rehab cost, and then I put it on my credit or however you guys structure the deal. So I have been able to get really creative with that, and the return on the investment, especially for people with a self-directed IRA, it'll beat it every time. So to kind of give you an example, I own a mobile home park in Cascade Locks, and my wife, her IRA owns 20% of that park. And she took $30,000 of her self-directed IRA and put it into the park, or put it into the entity, bought 20% of the entity. And then I financed the park. We remodeled it and got it going. So we bought it for $500,000, put $200,000 into the park. So we're in a total $350,000. I just did a cash out refi, and the park appraised at 1.1. So in that scenario, her portion, or 20% of the equity, is like $250,000. So that's a significant jump since 2016. So 4 years, she went from $30,000 to $262,000 in equity, and the self-directed IRA is being fed $2,000 a month in cash flow inside the IRA. So without her contributing from the outside, she can put in, her IRA itself is making $24,000 a year. That's an amazing number. That's not something that an IRA is performing at. So just think a little bit outside the box. Really, in my opinion, the self-directed IRA investor as a partner is golden because they're using money. They don't need the tax benefits. You can shift those in the operating agreement of the LLC, and you can buy more deals. So that's one recommendation that I would have.
You met with your wife. What about is there any other way that you're finding partners? How are you looking for your partners?
Well, it's interesting you asked that. Uptown has one out right now that they're doing, which I think they're doing it brilliantly. So far, I've only used colleagues and friends with skill sets that are complementary to mine. I have a list of clients who are like chomping at the bit because they're not getting the return. I mean, they're just not able to get the returns on a standard deal. And I'm out knocking doors, right? So my area of expertise is negotiating the deal, tracking it down, analyzing it, and then stabilizing it. And a lot of people don't have the time or expertise to do that. And so I have people come to me really and say, hey, I've got $100,000 I need to put someplace, which is great. I love $100,000. So it makes it better for me, and it helps me afford a deal, utilize my area of expertise, and then make enough money to make them money and me money. So once you kind of get that template and keep going, it works super well. So, but I mean, I guess to follow up your question, anytime you start inviting outside of your immediate sphere, you kind of get into that securities situation. So you want to be really cautious about that and make sure that you're talking to an attorney about that. And if you need an attorney connection, let me know. But you're going to have to be doing offer memorandum, and it gets a little bit more sophisticated for sure.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody else have questions for our wonderful speaker? I'm not seeing anything. And Taylor or Trent, I think we're done. I mean, we've answered I don't think we need to go. We were going to end at 7:30, so we ended a little bit earlier, but we also started earlier, so that's good too.
Yeah.
So questions?
Well, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it. If anyone has any questions, you can shoot me an email.
You're so welcome. All right,
Thank you,
thanks
Matt.
everybody for coming. Appreciate it.
Terry,